Morning or good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. My name is Nancy Chambers, and I am a member of ARCS National Board of Directors and the ARCS Atlanta chapter. On behalf of ARCS Foundation, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first ARCS Scholar Enrichment Program, assessing the commercial potential of your doctoral research with guest speaker Chris Klaus, CEO of Fusion World. In addition to funding support for ARCS scholars' educations, ARCS Scholar Enrichment Programs offer ARCS scholars and alumni content to support your personal and professional lives. We are thrilled at the enthusiasm for this program today with scholars, alumni, and guests from 13 universities, government, and private industry in attendance. To those of you who are not a part of the ARCS community, I will share that we are a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to advance science in America by providing financial awards to academically outstanding U.S. citizens studying to complete degrees in top-ranked STEM university programs. This year, we are supporting 685 ARCS scholars, more than 90% of whom are working toward graduate degrees. Collectively, we've given more than 20,000 ARCS Scholar Awards since our funding. We are honored to have an outstanding speaker with us today to kick off the 2025-26 ARCS Scholar Enrichment Series. Christopher Klaus is a visionary entrepreneur, investor, and champion of early-stage innovation. He is widely recognized for his impact in cybersecurity, virtual worlds, and startup acceleration. Klaus's entrepreneurial journey began when he founded Internet Security System in 1994, where he served as Chief Technology Officer. Under his leadership, ISS grew rapidly, went public in 1998, and was acquired by IBM in 2006 for over $1.9 billion. Following ISS, Klaus turned his focus to nurturing the next generation of entrepreneurs. He co-founded 3 startup accelerators focused on entrepreneurial activities in neuroscience startups, security and machine learning ventures, and CreateX, based at Atlanta's academic partner, Georgia Tech, which helps students turn ideas into real companies. Klaus is also a founder and CEO of Fusion, a platform that connects college students with mentors, investors, and funding through accelerator programs. Fusion empowers students to actively engage in the startup ecosystem and bring their ventures to life. Chris, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with ARCS scholars about entrepreneurism. And now let me turn the program over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about entrepreneurship today. Can everybody hear me all right? Do you guys mind saying good morning in the chat? Awesome. All right. I see you guys all see that. So perfect. As I do this, if you don't mind, I'm going to have both a chat window open and I'll be able to share my screen and kick this off. So let me see if I can figure out how to hit the share button here. And I see the screen number 2. And you should be seeing it as well. All right. Awesome. Thanks. Glad you guys can hear me fine. Can you see the unicorn? All right, great. Perfect. And does everybody know what the unicorn is? This is kind of a metaphor in the startup world. If you're building a company, this concept kind of became popular probably about 10 years ago, where it's like if you get a startup that turns into a billion-dollar company, they call that a unicorn. So, kind of talking about my journey that I started about 30 years ago when I was kind of in your seat, being a college student, trying to figure out what to do, and wanted to kind of share how I went down this path and uh, kind of what I learned, and then what helped. Because I went back, I was like, what helped create the startup into a success? And then since then, I've been actually, and I'll share kind of what I'm doing now, helping open up the door for other students, college students, to pursue this avenue. But one of the big questions was, what are the things that make a startup successful? And a lot of it really does start at the very beginning. So if you get the right recipe at the start of the process, you have a chance at building a successful startup. And we'll get into that. So and then open it up for kind of just questions towards the end here, and we'll do that. But as we're going through, feel free to paste questions in there, and I will try to answer as many of the questions I see as possible. So with that, let me just start off with my own background, and I got into doing security as a high schooler, and really this was the beginning of the internet. So I had gotten into technology as a probably middle schooler. If anybody plays video games, very popular activity with kids. Everybody plays games, or most people have at least tried playing games. One of the things I got into was wanting to make my own game. I was like, that's the ultimate game if you can make your own game and make it fun. And that took me down a path probably in high school on how to learn how to program and how to code, do graphics and sounds, and automate a lot of the stuff that I was doing. And then the internet started taking off, and uh, back then it was impossible to find internet access. So I was trying to figure out, how do you hack internet access? And while I was on the internet, I actually found like Lawrence Livermore National Labs. This is in early 90s. So back then there was no commercial companies on the internet, which is hard to believe. But back then it was only government and universities and DARPA kind of being military. But I found some government site, the Department of Energy had a website, and you could log in as a guest. And they ended up reaching out to me while I was in high school, saying, "Hey, we notice you're on our computers, and want to invite you out to meet with everyone." And they had a summer program where my final year of high school, I got to go work on some supercomputers. But I told them I was real interested in hacking, and they were like, "Well, if you want to use our network as a test bed, you're welcome to." So that allowed me to start building out really an application I was calling the Internet Security Scanner. Where that name came from, it's kind of self-evident. I was like, oh, I'm on this thing called the internet. How do I scan it? Looking for security. And that was and because I had gotten into hacking, I was like, a lot of that's really tedious and time consuming. But if I write the program to automate that, that will allow you to quickly find what machines are vulnerable, what doors are open, what windows are open, and how to fix them. So DOE actually let me use their network to test that and see whether they had those issues. So they weren't paying me, so I gave them the reports for free, and in return, they gave me their network for free, and it was a win-win for both of us because they had a lot of machines that were very vulnerable, and that just made my software more valuable. I could see that it was working. I ended up going to Georgia Tech. I grew up in Florida, and Georgia Tech was probably the most engineering focused. I knew I wanted to do something in technology and computers, and so I came up here to Atlanta. And while I was a student, I didn't know what to do with the software, so I actually just released Internet Security Scanner for free, which because I asked others like, what should I do with this? And I think some of the community, was very much into Unix, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you give it away for free?" And that actually turned out to be a uh, great thing that I did because it ended up I got tons of feedback. I had lots of people using it. The source code was out there. I had people give me feedback on the source code, how to improve it. And then what happened is while I was a student at Georgia Tech, one of the gentlemen that was using the software, kind of was like an advisor, had reached out, said, "Hey, have you thought about commercializing it?" And that question, I go back to that was the first time I had not considered that, and I was like, going, let me think about that more. And then, sitting in math class, I ended up kind of saying, well, if I could charge for every vulnerability I'm finding, this thing could be very valuable. So I went and built out kind of more features, better put a better UI on it, and announced a commercial version like 3 months later. And very quickly, I had an Italian research center reach out and say, "Hey, we want to buy it." I didn't know how to price it, so I just said, "How about $1,000?" Which to me, as a college student, seemed like a lot of money. And they said, "Yeah," and then I got a check for $1,000. That was my um, investment into that allowed me to incorporate. They didn't. I don't know if they knew I was a student or not, but I got incorporated, set up a business license, and so now I'm actually a serious company at that point. Even though I was in my dorm room, but as I worked on it, and this is something, if you go down this path, you'll quickly realize if you're trying to do a startup and you're in a school like Georgia Tech, that's not easy. I realized the more time I spent on my startup, the more it's going to have an impact on my grades. And I didn't want to fail at Georgia Tech, and I didn't want to fail with my startup. So I ended up making a choice to take a break from school. I sat there and actually talked to admissions, going, "How good are my credits? How long do they last for?" And they were like, 10 years. I was like, "Well, that's plenty of runway to figure out whether I have you know, whether my startup will work or not. If it doesn't work out, my risk is I go back to school and finish and get a degree." So that was kind of the decision process. I had to talk to my parents and let them know, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I think I'll learn a lot. And worst comes to worst, I can always resume back." And the good news is, once I announced, that I was kind of working on this full time, um, one of the first customers beyond the Italian research site actually became DOE, who I had visited. Not intentional, but they called me up and said, "Hey, we really want to buy your software." And what was interesting at the time was I'd gotten a little bit more sophisticated with the pricing, because then I would ask them like, "How big is your network? How many machines? What's the range of IP addresses that you're going to scan?" And it came out to, I think $50,000. And I told Sandia National Labs it's going to be 50 grand. And the admin there who I was talking to, he goes, "Oh, well, you're going to have to fly out and buy pitch us to my boss for the $50,000." But he goes, I have authority for $30,000 uh, to buy without having to go get approval. And I was like, "Oh, that's funny. My price sheet, my price actually just got updated. It's now $30,000." And so with that, that was my first deal where for 30 grand, I just changed the price and they wrote me a check, and that was off to the races with DOE. And it turned out, um, what you'll find in business is that if you close one of the sites, it becomes dominoes for other sites. So like Sandia National Labs closed, and there's probably like 7 or 8 different labs across the country. We ended up having Oak Ridge Labs reach out, Sandia, Los Alamos, all the big labs ended up over time being customers. So, anyways, that was the start of internet security systems. One of the things I look back and go, what was helpful for me to get going, uh, to make ISS get off the ground, or internet security systems get off the ground. Coding definitely helped. I wouldn't call myself a master programmer, but I knew enough to automate scanning and doing some simple coding, and be able to debug and think about problems that way. But other two major skills, I think, one is meditation. That's a practice that I think everybody's heard of, but most people don't do it. If you do it, it's actually great from a, especially nowadays where the internet and your phone is always beeping at you. If you can unplug and meditate, focus on breathing. I actually think this is a huge thing for mental health, because even for myself, any big problems, I would meditate and just try to figure out, uh, kind of let the emotions out and just be like, is this the right thing? And ultimately being very grounded in the decision process. So in many ways, it helped me, just overcome any fear, because it was like, hey, I wasn't a knee jerk reaction. It was like, no, I thought about it. I think this is the best decision at the time I'm making it. So if it doesn't, if the startup fails, that's not a failure of me. That's just not the right idea. Anyway, so with that, that helped me make those decisions. And throughout my life, I strongly recommend to anybody who's anxious or imposter syndrome or any number of things. Um, meditation, I think, is a helpful skill. The other thing that helped me early on, that if you are going to go down this path, I think this is true with, even if you don't go down startup path, but you want to be successful in life, try to find. I didn't know anybody in business. All my friends were Georgia Tech students, and so I started asking around, and that's ultimately how I got lawyers and accountants. And then what I found from that is, through those accountants and lawyers, they would then connect me to other business people, ultimately building out kind of an inner circle. So this is something early in your career. I'm sure if you're in doing your research, you've got professors that are mentors. And then as you think about business, just apply that to the business realm and go, hey, who are other founders? Is there any other founders that are a few years ahead of you? They've probably faced a lot of the same problems you'll face. And for me, that became a great network to kind of bounce ideas off of. And that's actually how I found my co-founder. After a year of working on this, I was like, I need to have someone help me grow this business, because I know the technical side, but I was like, I want to find somebody who knows sales and marketing and business. And that's kind of what I looked for and ended up finding as a co-founder. And then later on, having this network and advisors and investors, et cetera, all of these people helped us kind of avoid selling too soon, feedback on ideas, how to grow the company, lots of stuff. So that network becomes really valuable as you're trying to solve, the challenge of, climbing this startup mountain. There's a lot of pitfalls that can be avoided if you talk to enough people and, get their feedback, and uh, you know lots of strategies there. So those were really the three skills: coding, meditation, and kind of just a network of inner circle people that I recommend everybody try to find throughout their life, advisors or mentors that can give them honest feedback. Um, all right, so I keep going. So with this is internet security systems. You know, I mentioned I needed to find a co-founder. Um, Actually, one of the early investors I had talked to had reached out to me because of my lawyer who put us in touch. I ended up I told him I'm looking to try to find a salesperson. He ended up connecting me with Tom Noonan, who went to Georgia Tech previously. He was about 10 years older than myself, but he also had done Harvard Business School, so he knew sales, marketing, organization strategy, fundraising. So we I would say super skills with him coming on board because those were a lot of things that I did not know how to do. I'd never done it before. And then that became really quick and easy for us to go out there, put together kind of a strategy, and a lot of that helped us become who we are. With that, ironically, on his first day, I was still selling software for $30,000 per kind of site-wide license. And when we went to NASA, they ended up wanting to buy, and Tom and I hadn't talked about pricing. And what had happened is I ran the scanner and it found every vulnerability on NASA's network, all their passwords and stuff. So they were like, "Holy crap, we need to buy this." So Tom and I actually had to huddle in a corner and ended up I told him, "Hey, I normally charge 30 grand," and he's like, "Wow, let's try 100." I was like, "All right." And the general there at JPL NASA was like, "All right, we're buying it." So Tom and I high-fived each other, and he had tripled my revenue. So that was amazing to have a business partner, add value on day one. And one of the first things he did and I did together is we sat down and just said, all right, let's plan, what does this look like both as a business but also culture. We kind of wrote out what kind of culture do we want to grow at ISS. We were like, we want to be ambitious. We want to really invest in the people, but we want to be frugal on, don't spend money on furniture that's ridiculous. Or we were trying to be, on the, let's put all our money into getting the best people, and giving equity to everybody, and put one of the things we did early on was say we want to become the number one trusted advisor in the security space. And I think having that as your goal kind of set us up for a North Star to go think about when we were thinking about what are we trying to achieve? Well, we wanted to be number one trusted advisor in the world. And so from day one, that became kind of our mantra of what we're setting out to do. And the culture is important because that helped us kind of figure out when we were hiring, who do we hire? And we'd actually do checks to, questions around that, like what kind of culture do you normally want to work in? What makes you comfortable? And you find out there's a lot of people that don't fit your culture. Well, if you don't hire them, then you're going to keep your culture aligned. And if you hire just people without any culture setting or boundaries, then you'll end up with culture that you didn't expect. So I think that was one of the things we did early on, was set culture that ultimately defined a lot of, I guess, the team and who we became. So when I go back and go, what helped us from day zero to think about is, if you're going to do a startup, one is think about a problem. I guess that's probably, one of the most important things is, what's the problem you're going to solve? In our case, it was security, and how do you, find vulnerabilities and protect their network and all that. So that was the problem we were setting out to do. But a couple other attributes. I definitely think having more than one co-founder definitely gave me a huge leg up. And I think that's true for any first-time founders. Is It's a good litmus test. If you can find another co-founder to join you, then you're not crazy, and you may be onto something. I think also, what you quickly find out is everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. So working as a small team uh, plays to those complements, and you get like 1+1 is 3 type thing with co-founders. So highly recommend that. I also believe one of the big attributes that was part of our success is, that going after a big market. If you're going to do a startup, try to find a market or a problem that is big, and you can kind of do the math really simple by saying, how many potential customers. And nowadays with AI, you can probably just have ask AI, like how many potential customers are there in the world, and then multiply that by how many, if they were to buy your solution, how much, what's that price point? That kind of gives you how big is that market financially. Pretty simple formula. And so we knew we were onto something big just by measuring that. Um, Highly recommend figuring out the problem. You want to work on problems, at least if you're going to do a startup that's a fairly big market. Small markets, as an example, would be restaurants. Why is it a small market? Well, typically a restaurant only serves within a mile or two of their restaurant. So you're just going to not have that many. That's why they don't scale to be billion-dollar companies. It But technology companies, solution companies that are solving big problems that scale, that's what you have to get to a unicorn. The third big thing is the ambition to scale. I think just stating it, making it your mission, being global if you can. At a minimum, you want to be across the U.S. maybe as your first target, but because I had that Italian research center as my first customer who had found me on the internet, that ended up being helped me just think about being global from day one. Like I was already like, oh man, we got a customer in Europe, and quite honestly, back then it was easy to, and it's still easy. It's even gotten easier to go, how do we get more customers on a global basis? And a lot of people don't realize this, but like Google and Facebook or Meta, TikTok, if you do paid advertising, a little secret is the more broader you choose, the cheaper it is to get a customer. And it's by significant delta. Meaning, if I target a city, I may spend $100 to get a customer. If I target the U.S., in many cases it can get down to like tens, 20, 30, $50. If I go global, it gets even cheaper to get people to sign up for your product. So there's actually some scale that comes in with auctions that drive the ability to go global, that I highly recommend doing sooner than later. A lot of people don't realize when they narrow their focus, their revenue is much potential is way smaller, and their cost to get that revenue goes way up, counterintuitively. And feel free, if you guys come up with any questions while I'm talking, feel free to throw that in chat. So that'll um, I don't want to not miss any questions if anything comes up. But with this, though, let me just hit some of the big milestones that helped ISS grow. Just to frame it, this was in 1994. One of the big things I mentioned was it was free to download. I didn't think through it at the time. I was doing it because I wasn't planning to commercialize it. But that free software really enabled all of my early sales, because people would download it, play with it, knew it worked, and then they wanted the commercial version because they could get support, updated features, more security checks, etc. So it was kind of like free marketing. And so I still tell founders, if you can kind of do the freemium model where it's free on the front end to test it out, and then have some way to bump up to a premium version. That's kind of standard nowadays, but that's something that inadvertently I did that back in 1994. And out of that, in the first year, drove over 100,000, and then Tom joined in '95. And one of the first things Tom did was brought on a VP of sales, and we had actually had brought on a couple salespeople that were helping close deals from leads we were getting online. So in order to download our software for free, you had to give us your email and phone number and name. And next thing you know, our salespeople were calling you up going, "Hey, what do you think of this software? Would you like to buy the commercial version?" So that was a big driver of our success. With Tom on board, we put together a pitch deck. It took us probably about 6 months from starting the process to closing that process, but we raised $4 million to Greylock, which is a prominent firm in California, and Sigma Partners was a Boston firm, and then Imlay Ventures was an Atlanta firm, but the two main investors were Greylock and Sigma. So we actually got on the plane and flew out to Silicon Valley, up to Boston, and I think that's, if you're going to raise money, go where the money's at, and that's where it was then, and it still is today. If you're going to go raise any serious capital, and we brought on a VP of with the 4 million. I'll share with you our secret formula for how we spent the money. We actually just divided it in half. We took half of that money, put it in the sales and marketing, and the other half in the engineering. And that was our formula, really, for the first rounds of funding that we got. So with that funding on the sales and marketing, there's lots of groups. We ended up doing lots of trade shows, conferences. Ironically, that still is one of the most prominent ways to go get customers. When I talk to founders, they spend their, go to conferences, go to trade shows. That's what the whole point is that they're meeting to talk about whatever problem space you're at. Look for commercial versions of conferences and trade shows, and you'll find potential buyers. We would do press tours. Ultimately, we expanded the engineering to cover not only the scanner, but we got into security monitoring. We then raised another 6 million. Kleiner Perkins, another top tier VC firm out in California, and we opened up. Interestingly, the first round we opened up an office in Brussels. And then the second round, and that focused on EMEA, which was Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So we got that covered. And what does an office in Brussels do? Well, they ended up hiring support, local marketing. They partnered with other value-added resellers. Really helped scale us in those local markets that we weren't ever going to touch directly. These guys went in there and helped scale that. And then we wanted to do the same thing in Asia, so we opened up an office. ISSKK was opened up in Tokyo, and so we were able to cover all of Asia, India, Australia, Singapore, China, etc. out of the Asia office. And then we ended up raising another 60 plus million in 1998 with an IPO. So we were able to go public in 4 years, which is nowadays less done. Usually it can take 10 to 12 years, but going public, we ended up going on the NASDAQ, and that helped us with a lot more funding and get some liquidity for all the early investors, including the founders. So. And everybody else. I mean, what we did is we gave everybody equity in the company. So I think we had over 100 millionaires that participated through that whole process. So I go back and I go, what was it about ISS that helped us go be successful? And this is something that I think you can, if you're going to do a startup, it's what I tell other founders. Try to hire A+ players. And we were in a constant mode of hiring, and we really saw it. I saw it firsthand where if you hire great people, that are excited about what you're working on, that are going to get passionate about it, that they ended up not only excelling, but they would attract other A+ players. But if you then brought in somebody who was, kind of fit the role but wasn't, top tier, it just never really it had a lot of impact that was not as positive as you'd like. And then they'd end up maybe bringing in C players, and you can quickly see how if you're going to hire, make sure take the time to hire the best you can, because that's who's driving your team to success. And that's where we focused a lot of our time on. That was probably one of the things. If you're going to grow a business, you end up learning how to hire and try to get the best people on board. Fundraising, I think that's another thing that we did. We ended up every year raising around and trying to do it quickly. At that time it was like every once a year. It took about 6 months, so we would raise for a roadmap that took us to like maybe 18 months. But we wanted to get ahead of not, ahead of the curve. So we saw that the market was big. That's the other reason why you raise money is you can try to bootstrap it. But if you think the market's big and there's a lot of potential competitors, et cetera, and it's a land grab, then raising money allows you to hire way faster than a lot of our competitors. So we were able to get out there and attract great people and move faster than bootstrapping. And then the platform itself, as I said, we put half our money into building out the platform, building out all the software. We got into hardware. We got into what now I would call SaaS, but managed security services. And so we did that faster than our competitors. We fundraised faster. And then global awareness, because we were international, we were in markets that a lot of our competitors didn't even know existed on a map. So we were getting revenue. You're basically doubling your revenue if you think global. And that's what we saw. We saw that, U.S. revenue was about half of all the revenue. So we ended up doubling our revenue just because we had a global mindset from the beginning. So one of the things I look at, lots of startups nowadays, and I think this has been validated time and time again, is the rate of progress. If you go do a startup, think about how do you move faster? How do you have bold goals? And how are you accomplishing that? Well, one of the things is to think about, can you move faster? Respond quicker to emails and having that ability to kind of get that flywheel going with your business, such that once that's going, then you're on a pathway towards a unicorn. Couple other things that I think help differentiate unicorns from non-unicorns. Already hit big markets. So these are the areas that I think are most interesting. You got AI, SaaS, fintech, cybersecurity. You got lots of stuff in the consumer space, health tech, clean tech. Anything that's got almost every business, I would say, has technology, but that's something that if you're going to do a business, try to think about starting with technology that can help you scale. I think second big thing that I think was helpful for both Tom and I is that purpose and mission driven, meaning we really wanted to be the number one trusted advisor, in the world, and that helps set the global stage. But I see that with a lot of companies. Um, you know, what makes them successful is that purpose driven or mission driven goal. It's not just I want to get rich. In fact, I think that's actually a negative. It's really having that vision to be like, I want to really solve this problem, because you're going to have your ups and downs. Trust me, there was many times where you get extremely frustrated, end of the world type of feeling, and then but you're on to something big, and you keep pushing until you get past whatever problems you're having. So I think that only happens if you're on a mission or a purpose. If you're just like get rich quick, then whatever happens you can derail you quick, because you're not in it for the mission. And then I think just tech startups in general. That's why you see VCs generally funding technology. And it can be deep tech. It could be really hard problems that you guys are researching. As you do your research, if you're thinking about could this be a business? It'd be like, well, what problem are you solving that would be applicable in where you're helping somebody, and would they ever buy this solution, or what would it take to make this solution valuable for whatever pain points that are out there that you're addressing. um, and you definitely want to be either product or service. And you can even be in the same, you're going to have competition, but normally you're trying to figure out, if you're going into a space where there's already competitors, what's the innovation, what's the unique insight that you have that the other players don't have. If you're just copy and pasting, I think that's tougher, because then you're only differentiating on price, and that doesn't motivate most people to. I mean, maybe it does in some cases, but in general, you'd want to have some unique angle on what makes you different, and have a story there. And then I do strongly believe two co-founders. I'd like to see at least one. Normally, when I'm investing, I'm like, does anybody know how to spell technology? Can they build stuff? That's going to help you scale quicker. And if you're not a technology person, can you help? Can you go find somebody? You're all in universities. There's definitely a lot of student clubs and other things typically around, whether it's startups or technology clubs or gameplay clubs, etc. That would be a huge advantage. Things that you shouldn't do, and not if you want a unicorn. These are it makes it really. If you're a consultant, you're charging by the hour, right? The problem with that is you can only scale so much your time until you can't clone yourself, at least not today. And so it's really hard to scale consulting into a unicorn. So if you're good, it's why as an investor, I would not invest in a consultant business model. I didn't, or agency model. They're just harder to scale. Um, you know, you wouldn't want to do a business model with no new innovation. And you can read. So these are things you probably wouldn't want to do if you're trying to build a unicorn. Now, if you're just trying to build a lifestyle business, then go for it. But if you want to really change the world and have impact, then do the top 5 things above. And then I put in FDA device approval, just because some of you guys might be in health tech, and that if your first startup is to go through FDA, that's a nightmare. So takes years, lots of funding. Try to be in the data side of healthcare, at least for your first startup. But that's just some advice based on watching and funding quite a few ideas in that space. High level, this is just data showing that of all the unicorns out there, the ones that had 2 founders has the highest probability. 3 founders is good. Um, uh, but then, then it gets into whether it's 1 or 4, it's about the same. And then if you get too many chefs in the kitchen, that doesn't help. It just harder to make decisions, etc. So I usually recommend, 2 to 3 would be great if you're going to start a business. And if you get more, that's fine. It's not, no, there's no hard rules. This is just the distribution of what are your chances. And so, obviously it shows that, 2 is better than 1, if you can find a co-founder. Any questions, guys? If anybody has any, I'll keep going. A couple other things. Where do you find co-founders? Turns out almost 40%, uh, find each other at the university. In my case, it wasn't directly in the same university, but because of the network of Georgia Tech, that obviously became, my co-founder went to the same university. So within that, I highly recommend, leverage that network. I mean, that's half the value is, most people think it's academics, but it's also the network of peers and friends and professors and others that you're meeting. That's where you can kind of reach out, and when you start telling people about your idea, you'll find that more times than not, people want to help you, especially when you're young, and you're trying to get going. And Probably it gets harder later in life because they're like, you've been around the block. You don't need as much help. But early on, everybody recognizes college kids probably need as much help as they can because they've never done this before. And that was true for me. Meaning, everybody I talked to was like, oh, always had interesting advice. Not that you want to take it from everybody, but it was always good to hear it. So. I'm going to go through this real quick, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A. But this is just showing computer science. If you can find a CS founder, or engineering, economics, these are all people who've been building a lot of unicorns. What's the probability? It's math, it's engineering, it's greater there. So if you're in journalism, it's harder to do a unicorn. So high level thing. And I can make these slides available if this is interesting data, but it's just showing you like what industries get $100 million round. This is a little bit old because this is 22. I need to update it, but I'd say now it's AI and SaaS, probably more AI lately. But these are your main industries, and you can kind of see the reason SaaS is so big is because it's a repeatable business, right? You get someone on a subscription and they keep paying. The other thing, this is just data showing the rate of progress is, more likely if you can raise a round sooner than later, you're going to have a unicorn more likely. And then funding rounds, this is like you can have up to 5 rounds. That's pretty standard. Unicorns, just in general, have been going up to the right. The number of unicorns keeps increasing. So the chance of a unicorn, I was on the left-hand side. Didn't even know the concept of a unicorn didn't even exist when we became a unicorn. And then nowadays, these numbers have grown and continue to grow. So more likely you can have a unicorn nowadays than not. Why a unicorn? Ultimately, I think the biggest value for myself was just it creates such a flywheel of value because everybody then starts to know about your company. Then you attract the best talent. It then has a lot of impact there. The other thing that becomes interesting is from an investor point of view, this is why investors invest, is that they want you to become a unicorn. So early on, if you're going to go raise money, you want to have a roadmap that says, hey, over the next 5-7 years, we're going to become a unicorn. What that tells you is for every dollar you put in today, you want it to be 1,000x. That's the investment that you want, the investors want. Because with that's a great return. So they want to see that that's your goal. And a lot of people don't realize this, but out of all the investment that all these venture capitalists put into startups, only 6% of them return 70% of the returns. What that means is you really want to be shooting for a unicorn because it's the most likely that you have the biggest payout. And if you as a founder though, a lot of you guys could end up saying, I don't need to be a unicorn. Maybe I sell this at 20 million and be super excited, or 100 million. Ultimately, you don't have to get a unicorn, but your chance of getting a $10 million business is extremely likely in the technology space. I'll just say that because that's most of the founders I'm funding quickly get to 10 million and they're shooting for 20. And then some, it depends on how big your revenue's growing, but your value then quickly. And I've funded several unicorns already. So, and so one of the things I'll share with you, one of my goals was to look back, and I ended up giving back to Georgia Tech. So there's a nice little building at Georgia Tech with my name on it. And I was going there and I was like, how do what are you working on? So I asked the students, and they always had amazing research, amazing ideas. And I'm like, have you thought about commercializing it? Kind of doing the same thing that happened to me. And the biggest blocker I found for founders or for students was that they had never even considered doing a startup. And that was true for me. And until someone asked me, I hadn't considered it. So I ended up creating a program within Georgia Tech, at Georgia Tech, called CreateX. And that program has probably been the most successful program at that university in terms of impact, because what it's done is it's opened up a whole new pathway where before Georgia Tech was very much get your degree, get out, get a job. Now the kids that go through CreateX, there's components for education, there's components for research, and there's components for actually launching your startup. Those that end up launching their startup, they end up creating jobs. So you're not just getting a job, you're making jobs. So that's pretty exciting. And if you're an international student, I don't know how many anybody international on here. If you are, it turns out it opens up a lot of visa options, like this outstanding visas, and there's other options that make you stand out as opposed to just getting a job. And I think that plays well with, especially with the market as it is today. And then finally, I'm building a platform that will help, tens of thousands of students. And I'm actually looking to partner with universities across both the U.S. and international to help foster these startup programs, these what I call accelerators, or the industry calls accelerators, and have them, CreateX is an accelerator at Georgia Tech, but a lot of universities have them, but a lot of them don't have the right formula in place of who to connect them with in terms of mentors, investors, et cetera. So that's one of the areas where I want to help make change. So anyways, that's the high level thing. I know I have 5 minutes left, so I see Nancy on there.
Yeah.
I do see a
couple of
question.
good questions. Yep.
Yep, I see at least one question. Saying what was your work-life balance during this process, especially at the beginning? Great question. I would say, because I was going from a college student that was, if you're at Georgia Tech, you're probably aware that you're going to spend crazy hours studying. So I was already in a mode of like always, you either going to class or studying. So when I switched it to business, that's kind of, when you say work-life balance, I kind of just was like, I'll do that when I get older, when I turn 30 or something. So I didn't worry about work-life balance. And I think that if you're doing a startup, that's kind of some of the trade-off you're going to do. I mean, I still socialized. I still had friends. I didn't cut off my life balance in terms of going out on the weekend and having a beer and meeting up with friends. But during the day, I'd wake up excited about what I was working on, and Tom and we'd be shooting emails up until probably 1 a.m. and then and then repeat, on that. So from a work-life balance, the other big advantage you guys have, and this is why I like working with students, is, uh, you know, you from a risk perspective, this is probably the only part or time in your life where you're not, you know, most of you guys aren't married yet. Most of you don't have uh, a big house to pay for. You don't have cars to pay for. Maybe, hopefully you've kept your burn low as a student so that you can put all your time and focus and energy into doing a startup, and not worry about bills and so on. Hopefully you're still on your parents' healthcare plan, so you don't have to worry about health insurance. So at this point, it's a good time to be like, all right, let's go try this out. And what I find, just to give you some math on founders, half of the teams that go through CreateX, and they'll spend their summer working on their idea to go from idea to launching some minimal viable product and try to get customers, try to get feedback. If you do those two things, build a prototype or product and talk to customers, you've done the two essential things to having a business. Oh, and I can stop sharing my screen. All right.
So, Chris, we have a couple of other questions. Maybe you can give about 1 minute to each one of these. One of them is from an alumna from Georgia Tech. And she says she's curious if you have any advice for those whose research appeals to government agencies. The recent policy has significantly changed this. For example, she's involved in environmental research, but the rhetoric around climate change is really challenging. What advice do you have for her?
Yeah, if that's your passion, um, around like clean tech and climate change, I guess I would try to ask, what is there any commercial viability? At least this is from a startup entrepreneur point of view, would be to go, what are the big problems in that space? And I've been fortunate to invest in this space, so I'm very excited about it. I think there's a ton of investors that are still investing in this. We know it's a problem, so I would say the industry is still um, pursuing this, and this could be in the area of solar, could be in the area of wind, it could be alternative energies. If that's one area, but there's any number of problems in that space. So I would strongly recommend taking your research in that area, because I do think it's going to get harder to get funded from a grant perspective, or from government, at least in that area. And therefore, if you can't get it funded, but you think you're onto something, I'd see if you can't pitch it as a business idea and see if somebody would fund it. Or
Last,
or, or
last
sorry.
question.
Yep.
What did you find was the key to change the culture at Georgia Tech to nurture entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that's probably not a short answer, but ultimately there was probably the key thing really was CreateX, kind of figuring out a program, and find the unlock on that was I found a dean that also believed in it. So if you can find somebody at the university that will champion it, that's what I needed, was a champion to take that idea. We collaborated. I helped fund it, but I also, unfairly probably had, with a building on campus, I could talk to the president and have a, like, hey, I want this supported, and I wanted to make sure he supported it, because ultimately I didn't want to fund it if we weren't going to get support from the president and the provost and the dean, et cetera. But and you start off with expectations that it's small. We only did like 8 startups the first time, but the second year, once word got out, it was like 16, and then the next year we had 30, and then next year we had 60, and Georgia Tech is right now up to 150 startups this past summer. And the president of Georgia Tech has now said he's going to go to 1,000 startups a year. So that's a serious number. That puts Georgia Tech would put it #1 in the world for number of startups being generated by students. And so I'm committed to it. But I'd like to see this also happening at other schools. So if anybody's hearing this and wants to explore this further, would love to stay in touch. And I had shown my LinkedIn QR code or website, so feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn and be happy to follow up and hopefully grow the startup ecosystem within your university.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It was a wonderful program. We appreciate your time and expertise and the fact that you shared it with our scholars and alum.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nancy. Thanks for having me. Take care.